that. Now, I'm a really bad drawer. You see, here, this is right down there. Yeah, I knew this was. I'm afraid. First time I did this, it looked completely obscene. So I want you to. That looks like absolutely nothing at all, does it? Okay, damn. Anyway, I think we just put. No, I can't do that. No, right. Okay. No, that looks bad too. But anyway, oh no, that looks even worse. Right. I knew this was a mistake. Right. I'm going to make another little picture here. You're not come to arrest me, have you? No.
Let's make your own
The mic. Yeah, right.
Thank you.
A mistake, but anyway. Right, that is another. Okay. Oh, God, that really is bad, isn't it? Hang on. No, it's all right. No. Okay.
I don't know what it is that works, but
In fact, actually, it's a lot smaller than that. This is really, really bad. Is that? Yeah.
yeah, that's what it is.
Right. If you take the whole of the region of the Middle East, right, it doesn't really look like that, but in fact, actually, it actually doesn't look like that at all. But except in one sense, you see the scale of the region, and this is sort of Israel and Palestine in there. So it's a tiny, tiny bit of land, which is then surrounded by very large countries, large in population or large in land mass, right? Then when you come here, right, which is basically this writ large, here is the West Bank, right? This would be Gaza here. It's the state of, actually, there we go, right? So it should be a little bit smaller. And here's basically where Jerusalem will be right about there, Tel Aviv right about there. Okay, now, what actually happens in this situation? I mean, that is probably the worst drawing of the Middle East map you'll ever see. But what actually happens in this situation is that you've got two things that are going on. The first is that the actual territory of Israel and Palestine is tiny compared with the whole of the region. And what that means is, essentially, is that people in Israel feel that they are living in actually a very small bit of land, surrounded by essentially nations that are of different culture, different religion, and are at the moment, or to varying degrees, inimical or hostile to them. And then when you come to the actual situation in Israel and Palestine, what you find is that you've got the West Bank. This is probably about, I don't know, from here to here about, I don't know, 15, 20, maybe less actually. At points, it goes right into about 10 kilometers between the West Bank and the coast. And there you have Gaza down here. It is therefore absolutely inconceivable and impossible, since you've got settlers in this part of the West Bank too, and you've got 20% of the Israeli population that are Arab in this part of the world. It is absolutely impossible to conceive of peace except on the basis of reconciliation at a profound level. In other words, what people always say is, look, this is a matter of territory, right? The Palestinians, who are predominantly Muslim, they get this bit and this bit, and the Israelis that are predominantly Jewish, they get that bit there. Actually, because when you look at it, it's in this tiny bit of land in this vast area, it is completely inconceivable that these two can make peace together simply on the basis of a territorial deal. Right? I mean, the reason why it's so hard to make peace in this context, and in my judgment why we haven't so far, is because it isn't just a matter of what is the appropriate territory or what are the borders. Actually, the borders people can pretty much work out. You can do land swaps for some parts of the settlements. You've got the 1967 Green Line. It's not actually that hard, except that if the Israelis can't be sure of security and the Palestinians can't be sure of sovereignty, then actually it doesn't matter what they agree in concept about the territory or the borders, there's not going to be peace. So the reconciliation that you have to have is absolutely fundamental to the peace. It's fundamental because the territory is so small. It's fundamental, incidentally, for a very plain and obvious reason, which is Jerusalem, which is divided into East and West Jerusalem, and the Holy City, which is very small in geography, very small, but is the holy place for all of the Abrahamic religions. You can't resolve this by leaving aside religion and religious faith. If there are people who believe as a result of their religion that they should have the exclusive right to worship there, you're not going to get peace. Right? So in Jerusalem itself, this concept of reconciliation is absolutely vital. Politically, actually, this Arab world that surrounds Israel here is today, like Israel, probably as worried about the influence of the power up here, which is Iran, as they are about the existence of the State of Israel on the Arab side or the Arab hostility on the Israeli side. Now, they actually have a combined interest today, combined strategic interest in making sure that power of Iran is properly curtailed. It's very hard for them to come to that view without accepting the fact that just because you're a Jew doesn't mean to say that you don't have the same right to exist in this region as me as a Muslim. Because if they are going to have a point of unity strategically against what is a Shia Muslim power, then that can only really happen if they're prepared to put their strategic interests before their religious difference. And of course, the very reason why Iran operates very strongly with the people in Gaza is precisely in order to make sure that that should not happen. That they see a common enemy in Israel rather than the Israelis linking up with the Arabs and seeing a common enemy in the power of Iran. But the principal reason why the reality is so important is that without some concept of peaceful coexistence and reconciliation, it is impossible for Israel to believe that it is going to have security in this small territory, large area, small territory, absolutely mixed, living side by side. And likewise for the Palestinians, it will be impossible to think that the Israelis are ever going to really, in those circumstances, let them run their territory, especially as they will have to join this territory up across Israel, unless there is some concept of fundamental reconciliation between not just the two peoples, but actually the two cultures. So this is, when you look at religion in this context, yes, you can see it as the source of the conflict in some respects, at any rate, partially at any rate, but it's also the concept of reconciliation in a religious sense is also a fundamental part of the solution. Because otherwise the politics is always going to be hobbled by an essential belief on the part of both peoples that they are irredeemably divided according to culture and religion. And then the geography, which is the reason for my appalling maps, then make it extremely hard to then reach a political solution. So sometimes when people say to you now, look, the problem is, you just need to get the parties in a room and work out a deal and so on. Actually, that is not going to produce an agreement unless it is matched by the development on the ground of sufficient points of reconciliation and working together and living together that makes sense of that concept of territorial division. And of course, the whole idea really of the two-state solution, because there never has been a Palestinian state, and before the end of the 1940s there had never been an Israeli state. The whole concept of the two-state solution and peace is the granting of a state, one for the Palestinian people, one for the Israeli people, on the basis not just of fair distribution of territory, which itself is difficult but in fact resolvable, but on the basis that it is possible for two peoples in that small space, in that large region, to live together peacefully. So that concept of peace isn't just about practical political negotiation. It is also about practical religious reconciliation and about people learning to treat each other as equals and as partners, an idea that itself is not possible if you regard the other, the person different from you, as essentially inferior or hostile. So that's why, of course, religion is in part responsible for this, but it is also in part the solution to it. And that's why when we examine this issue to do with religion and reconciliation, and people say, look, religion is the problem, in fact, because so many people are motivated by their faith, and because faith is a real living reality of these two peoples in the lives that they lead, it is inconceivable to talk about a peace process that doesn't have within it this concept also of reconciliation in a religious sense. So, I therefore think religion can be a source of conflict. It can conceptually be part of the answer in terms of its value systems and the claims that it lays. It can also practically be part of the answer by bringing about the context within which political negotiation to resolve conflict can succeed. And why, finally, is this even more relevant today in the era of globalization? In my view, one, because, as I've said before, in globalization, people are pushed together. Second, and this is a very interesting point about the way the world works today, because of modern communication, images of conflict are immediately transmitted across the world. So if something bad happens down in Hebron, around about there, that bad image doesn't stay there for more than 20 minutes. It will be, and the next day certainly, it will be up on websites and transmitted right across the globe. So why is this more relevant today in the era of globalization? It's because globalization is not just about pushing people together, it's also about the visual impact that modern technology allows in events that happen, how things are disseminated, both provocatively and emotionally, as well as rationally. It has relevance, thirdly, because human capital is how the world succeeds today. And human capital cannot be developed except within a framework of reconciliation rather than conflict. So my conclusion from this is as follows, that in today's world, this concept of religious reconciliation is more important than ever before because of the way globalization impacts on our world. That it is true that religion and religious conflict is a major problem, and possibly the majority of conflicts in the world today have a religious dimension to them. But it is also true that both conceptually and practically, reconciliation through the force of religious ideas and religious practice can play a part in resolving conflict and in bringing about peace and harmony. And this comes back eventually, of course, to the fundamental question that lies behind the whole reason for creating the foundation, the course, and everything else, which is this: what is necessary then to ensure that religion plays the positive, not the negative role? And the answer is to have a view of religion that is anti-exclusivist and that is open to those of a different faith. Okay?
So let's take about 10-minute break, and then we'll reconvene and have discussion.
God, it's very strange to see people actually taking down what you say. I don't know, very dangerous, I would have thought, but yeah.